Well, what's up, RIM family and friends? Hey, we are so excited that you're joining us here today. And we believe with all of our heart, it's not by happenstance or accident that you find yourself here. And we believe that God has something really sweet in store for you. Well, my name's Drew Worsham, in case we haven't met, and I'm one of the pastors here at the RIM Church. And I want to just, highlight a few things that are coming down the kind of the path for us. And so, Soul mentioned earlier that on Christmas Eve, we're actually going to have an online gathering, and we're really excited. This will be our first family church tradition for Christmas Eve. And so we decided to push it all online because we know that many of you guys are traveling, and because of the COVID spikes, we just want to make sure that you're being safe and that you're with family and friends during the holiday season. So we're really excited. We may have some special guests, and it'll be a can't miss opportunity. So mark your calendar for Christmas Eve at 7 p.m. And we can't wait to see you there. We have started a journey through the Advent season. And last week we looked at this, we started this series called God with Us, Emmanuel, and we looked at the Advent of hope. And we communicated that because Jesus has come to earth, wrapped himself in flesh, that you and I, that we have hope, that whatever we're walking through, whatever storm we find ourselves in, whatever crisis that we sense around us, and that God is with us, and we have hope that it's not going to be this way forever. And then two, we have the ability to extend hope to all those that God has put in our life for a purpose. And because that Jesus became the incarnation, that he put on flesh and moved into our neighborhood, that you and I get to be incarnational as we are the hands and feet of Jesus, and we love our neighbors, we love our coworkers, we love the people that we meet at restaurants and gyms and coffee shops and everywhere that God sends us. In church, I've been so encouraged watching you be good news in this holiday season. Keep it up. Well, we're going to continue through this series, God with Us, and today we're going to look at the advent of hope. Now, I have a 2-year-old named Tilly, and she's just recently gotten introduced to the Muppets. And a few years ago, the Muppets and famous singer CeeLo Green co-performed a Christmas song called All I Need Is Love, complete with a music video. And in true Muppets fashion and form, I don't know how many Muppet fans we have, but if you haven't seen it, it's full of action and humor, and all your favorites show up, like Kermit and Fozzie and Miss Piggy to Gonzo and his chickens and all the rest. And there's plenty of diamonds and gold and bling. And CeeLo and the Muppets sing about all the Christmas presents that they're receiving, from fancy toys, expensive watches, and the latest technology. But perhaps, ironically, at the core, the song captures the true message of Christmas. The Muppets and CeeLo's don't want all of that stuff. All they want, or all they need for Christmas, is love. Well, almost all of them. Miss Piggy completely misses it and obviously is still focused on material possessions. And I'm quite sure that the Muppets never set out to make any grand theological statements with this Christmas song. But the song taps into the truth that what all of us really need is love. And today, as we celebrate the Advent journey of God with Us, we are celebrating love. And when Jesus came into the world as a baby, he was a human embodiment of the gift of God's love. And when he came as Emmanuel, God with us, he came as God incarnate, and he came as love incarnate. And if you weren't with us last week, or if the Advent is unfamiliar to you, let me briefly explain our journey towards Christmas. The word Advent, it comes from the Latin word adventus, which means coming or arrival. And this whole season is marked by expectation and waiting and anticipation and longing. And Advent is not an extension of Christmas, that it's actually a season that links the past and the present and the future. That Advent offers us the opportunity to share in the ancient longing for the coming of the Messiah, to celebrate his birth, and to be aware and alert to his second coming. Advent looks back in celebration at the hope fulfilled in Jesus' coming, while at the same time looking forward in hopeful and eager anticipation to his second coming when he returns for his people, his bride, the church. So during Advent, we wait for both its active, assured, and hopeful waiting. And each week we focus on a different attribute of God represented in the coming of Jesus. We look at hope, love, joy, and peace. And today we're going to focus in on love. So, we've already begun today talking about a love song. And so let's talk now more about a love story. And wow, if our culture isn't full of both. It's not just our present culture, but it's really our entire history of humanity. Like, can you imagine the power that you would have if you harnessed all the creative energy that's been devoted to writing love stories and love songs throughout history? If you start with songs and movies and stories that we know in our time, and we start scrolling back through history, through the novels and poems and plays and epics and oral narratives, the list would go on and on and on. And it seems that throughout the entire history, we humans have been inspired and moved and confused and intrigued and motivated by love and trying to understand it. And maybe that says something about us. Maybe there's a reflection there of our origins and our Creator and our deepest longings. That God's love is woven through our very creation and existence and being. But have you ever thought about the Christmas story being a love story? I mean, sure, like we know the Christmas story. You've heard it many, many times before, but think about it. Like, it's the ultimate love story, like really. And today what we're going to do is we're going to dig deeper into this point and look at how it affects you and me and how we experience this supernatural love of God when we journey through the Advent season and we focus in on this truth that God is with us. So, if you have a Bible, I want you to turn to 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4. And the truth is, this passage is not typically viewed as a Christmas passage. It's not linked to the Christmas story. But as we think about God with us, and we think about God and leaving his throne room and coming to us, and this passage has been just in such an anchor of hope in a season where what we've been longing for and clinging to is the love of God. And so John, this is the disciple John, who walked with Jesus, who we read from in chapter 1 of John 1 last week. And here he's going to talk about the love of God. And in 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, this is what the passage says. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and he sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, or beloved, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. And so today I have two simple points. And here's the first one. God is love. If we were watching a movie of the Christmas love story, John would be forcing us to pan back, drifting out of the drab and the dusty Galilean village, seeing a wider and wider vision of this ancient landscape, beyond continents and ocean and beyond Earth, and still further past solar systems and the Milky Way galaxy, and somehow wider still through the limits of the universe and space and time, till you get beyond all of that, and all that is left is the infinite presence that is love. There is only God. And I love how the Apostle John, he says it right here in verse 7. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Because whoever does not love does not know God, because," don't miss this, "because God is love." God is love. Later on in verse 16, he would say it this way. He said, "So we know and rely on the love of God that he has for us, because God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him." That this is the nature of our God. God is love in the purest form, that he can be nothing but loving, because God and love are synonymous. Love comes from God. Love was there at the center of God's creative forces that made the universe and formed you and I in his image to be in relationship with him. Love was there even when the world fell into sin and rebellion, and despite the catastrophic consequences of humanity's fall, love was there in shepherding Adam and Eve and their family into this altered world. Even then, love was making a way to restore all that was lost. Love forged a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Love continually led the Israelites through relocation and resettlement, through triumph and imprisonment and exile. And as we trace throughout the Old Testament, love guided and corrected and exhorted and showed mercy to the ever disobedient and easily distracted Israelites. Then, in the Christmas story, love left the kingdom of heaven, and love wrapped itself in human flesh, and love was taking on the form of humanity in the person of Jesus. Don't miss this. Love is God with us. Love is Emmanuel. In verse 9 of this passage, he goes on and he says this. He says, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and he sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin." In the midst of human crisis, when the world was at its darkest moment, God provided the love that the world desperately needed by choosing to love and cultivate a relationship with us. And that even though our sin means death and separation from a holy and perfect God, in his nature of pure love, he chose us. He chose you. He chose me, even at the terrible price of his own Son's life. John 3:16, one of the most popular passages in the world, tells us that it was because of love that God sent Jesus to the earth to give his life for us. The love of Emmanuel, God with us, is God's perfect love in human form that we celebrate. And this is the love that knows exactly what we need, no matter what we are facing in this season. And so whether it's the support from a friend or family member or the restoration in a relationship that is broken, maybe it's a medical miracle or it's financial relief or a new job, or maybe it's simply that you need a friend in this season. Or maybe what you need is a real relevant encounter with the God who is in love with you, that's here for you, who's making a way to accomplish his work in your life. And church, I want you to hear me say this. God's love is specific, and God wants to meet you right where you are. He wants to speak to you in a language that you understand. His love is specific. What is it that you want from him? What is it that you need from him? One, he already knows, but he wants to hear your heart. Let me give you a quick example. One of my favorite stories of Jesus is in Luke chapter 18. And Jesus is on his way to Jericho. Like he's headed to Jerusalem. I mean, he's headed to the cross. And the disciples are all coming. There's a huge crowd. And there's this blind beggar on the side of the road. And he hears that Jesus is coming. And he begins to call out. And he says, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the disciples look at this man. They're like, hey, keep it down. Like, hush, hush. Jesus is super important. He's doing big things. He doesn't have time to be interrupted by people like you with needs. And Jesus hears about this blind beggar and he tells the disciples to bring him to him. And it says this in verse 40 of chapter 18. It says, Jesus stopped and he ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, Jesus asked him, don't miss this, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man responded, Lord, I want to see. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has made you healed. Church, did Jesus not know he was blind? Of course he did. He just wanted to know what the man really wanted. And I believe that Jesus looks at you. He knows every one of your needs. He knows everything that you desire. And he goes, what is it that you want from me? So, that's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that God's love is so eternal and so specific and that it's never ending. He doesn't give up on us. God's love was, it is, and it will be. That God will never stop demonstrating his love in a tangible, practical ways for you. Both daily occurrences and history-changing events like Christ's birth. God is with us. And because of that, you can experience love in totally new ways. So here's what I want to do. I want to kick it to you, and wherever you find yourself, in house church, or maybe you're alone journaling, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine that Jesus, like God in the flesh, just walked into your room, into your living room, bedroom, wherever you find yourself, your car, and Jesus walks into the room that you're in, and he's sitting, he sees the house church, or he sees you alone, and he walks up to you, and he sits down next to you. And in the flesh, he looks and he says, what is it that you want? What is it that you need from me, child? How would you answer that question? How would you answer that? And so here's what I want you to do. I want to kick it to you. I want to give you a few minutes. And I want you to take some time, and I would love it if you would share with your house church, what is it that you need from Jesus in this season? Maybe it's physical. Maybe it's emotional or relational, or maybe it's financial. But would you be open and honest? Because it's impossible for you to be fully loved if you're not fully known. And so share openly, share vulnerably. Like let people into what it is that you need in this season. And if you're alone, journal. And would you carry those things to Jesus, and would you let him know what's in your heart and what it is that you need in this season? Take a few minutes and process this. Well, welcome back. Today, there's one more thing I want you to see. I want you to see that not only God is love, but I want you to see that God's love flows through us. In verse 11, he goes on and he says this. He says, "Dear friends or beloved, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one's ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us." In this Advent season, you and I, we have an opportunity to reflect on how we can, yes, receive God's love, but also how we can give God's love to one another. That Jesus taught this in John chapter 13. He said, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." That Jesus communicates and John communicates that you and I, the world, what will change the world, what will put Jesus on full display, what will put God's love on full display is when you and I love one another. When we experience the extravagant love of God and then it grows and it overflows in us as we extend kindness and care and support to those around us. And sometimes to be obedient to that, it takes baby steps. Sometimes it requires a bigger leap. But I want you to hear me say this, church. God can be trusted. Why? Because he is always with us and he is love. Love is with us. And it is love that makes a way for us to be good news, no matter what we are facing in this season or in the days ahead. Just a few verses prior to this one that we've kind of camped out on. In 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, John would say it this way. He says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." I love at the beginning of the church in Scripture, you see in Acts chapter 2, as they're gathering together, and man, they're praying together, they're doing life together, they're sharing meals. In verse 44, it says, all the believers, all, not some, not a few, all the believers were together and they had everything in common. And this is radical, but this is what it says. It says they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Church, this is wild and it's maybe a little crazy. And even as we try to figure out how to do this online, as you're meeting in house churches, here's what I want to do. I want to wrap up this time and I want to kick it to you and give you 120 seconds. And I want you to begin to just process as a house church. What's he speaking to you? And how can you be obedient to it? But I want you to zero in. And I want you to think about this. Just a few seconds ago, many of you in house church, you begin to share out loud what it is that you need in this season, what it is that you desire, what's going on in your life. And church, I want you in this time, I want you to process how is it that we could be good news to one another in this season? And I'll even take it a step further, maybe going, what would it look like for you to actually meet a need that someone just shared? That maybe someone's like, hey, it's a lonely season for me. And you go, I have relational capital. I can help you with that. Maybe someone's going, hey, I've fallen on hard times financially. And you go, hey, I have some resources that I can help with you. I could maybe buy some groceries. Or, hey, I have a friend that's looking for someone to work for them. And so I can connect you to get you a job. Or maybe somebody needs a place to stay for the holidays. Or there's so many needs that we put on a table. Maybe we take a second and we actually try to reach each other and take care of each other. And so if maybe there's needs in your house church that you're like, I don't know what to do with this or what's the step, or maybe you're alone, but you would love to share, we've made an email address, which is needs@therim.church. And you can send us an email letting us know what it is that you're walking through. And this is what we're going to do, church. If maybe you're watching this and you're like, hey, God has been so gracious to me and I don't really need much, but I can meet a need, would you send us an email and go, hey, this is where God has blessed me. This is what I could help out with. This is what I could do. Maybe it's, hey, I've got an extra lawnmower, or I could mow somebody's grass on the weekend, and that's the need that this maybe elderly person needs. We want to play matchmaker. In church, our goal and our hope is that we would love each other well. We would be good news to one another. And this is what would put the love of God on full display to an unbelieving world. Church, I'm proud of you. I'm going to give you this space and this time to just sit with Jesus and go, God, what are you asking me to do? So take this time, be obedient. I love you, and I can't wait to hear the stories of how you're being good news to one another and to the world around you.